everybody, what's going on? And welcome to the very first episode of Screen Speak. It is a podcast that is all about movies, life, and so much more. And I'm your host, your architect, the curator of this. I don't really know what you want to call me, but that's who I am, and I'm Jordan Anderson, and this is my podcast. So just really sincerely thank each and every one of you for being amongst the first listeners and just stopping by and again, just listening to this. I've repeated that a couple of times now, but anyway, I'm just very grateful to be here, to be able to get this podcast finally out there after working on it for the months, potentially longer, that I've been developing it. So it's out in the ether, and I'm not hitting edit or anything like that. This is purely going to just be a 100% unedited podcast through and through. So here we are. Let's get this rolling. Okay. So, a couple things first. Got to get the plugs out of the way. I think that's what they do on podcasts anyway. But give this podcast a follow, please. That's the first plug, is just give this podcast a follow. Follow it on Spotify, because I'm presuming that's how you're listening to this. So please follow the podcast on Spotify, and you can also check out its Instagram page. That's right. There is an Instagram page. It's called @ScreenSpeak Podcast. So if you look that up on Instagram, you should be able to find it. There's not exactly any posts. I think there'll actually be a post by the time this episode is actually out. But there will be posts that I will put on there from time to time of movie-related things that I feel like sharing with you all that may have some tie-ins into episodes I do, or I may even give like sneak peeks to upcoming episodes or content that I have planned. So definitely take a look out for that. And lastly, excuse me. And lastly, please look up the YouTube channel. That's right. There's also a dedicated YouTube channel for this podcast called Screen Speak. It's pretty straightforward. It's the same name as this, but it's called Screen Speak, and you can find it just by looking up Screen Speak on YouTube or Screen Speak's podcast, and I believe you should be able to find that. But go ahead and subscribe to that channel if you may. Because you can go there and check out short clips as opposed to listening to the entire episode on there, because some people prefer to consume their podcasts in that format as opposed to listening to the entirety of it. So I think that makes sense. All right, so you're here now, so you're probably wondering, okay, well, what is this podcast actually all about? So I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of the podcast and give just a little bit of background into how I actually got to this place of doing this, because I think you'll find it interesting. And then I'm going to talk about the movie that I've selected for this very first episode, Lost in Translation. Okay, so what this podcast is, what Screen Speak is all about, is that it's a podcast that is all about movies and the tie-ins and messages that they convey through life and the connections that are drawn from life within the movies. And I realize that sounds a little heavy-handed when I say it like that, but I think there's a lot of interesting things that can be said about movies, and I, if you haven't already guessed, am quite a big advocate of film, of movies, of the industry, of entertainment, exhibitionism, all the different facets of movies I tend to eat up and go crazy over. So I have no shortage of thoughts that I can deliver on movies. But where I draw the life comparisons from is because movies mean a great deal to me. They always have, and there are definitely pieces of movies that I've taken with me in life and that have helped shape in a way who I am today. But then there's also messages and themes that I like to think and reflect on in movies as well, which I think just goes to show their impact that they have on the culture and just people in general. So I think there's really interesting things that can be said about that. And as far as like how episodes will be in terms of their tone, well, I'm still figuring that out. This is a new venture for myself, but I do think that episodes will range from anywhere from being, light or humorous, make it serious on a couple of them, or somewhere in between. The point is, it's going to go in a couple of different directions, but each episode will stay grounded by focusing on one movie per episode. So I think that makes sense. Now, what's actually led me to doing this podcast? That's another question I just wanted to answer for anybody that's listening. There's a few things that led to me getting this podcast going. I suppose for starts, I should share some background. I've been making videos and content, doing creative content in one form or another. Since at least 2011. I know that's when I first started dabbling actually in the YouTube space before I ever tried doing what I'm doing right now. You can actually go out there and find a lot of those old videos because I believe I never took the channel down, and I don't actually remember the login information for it because I was, it was tied to a different email and whatnot. But those videos are living out there, so if you want to try to go find my earlier works, feel free to, but that doesn't mean I'm going to tell you how. So, so yeah, I started doing it in 2011, which is right around the time that I was in college, and it was just kind of for fun. But even before that, I had made like little short films and just sketch videos with some friends of mine that I grew up with. One of them I remember in particular was this video that we made of me and a buddy of mine driving around in like an ATV or a four-wheeler, something like that. And we're driving around pretending to be intoxicated at the wheel. And then we accidentally hit a person and have to deal with the aftermath of that. And the funny part about it is the person was we took a bale of hay and then we printed off a photo of a little boy that had like a shocked look on his face. And we hit the bale of hay and pretended that it was a body. And I think that's what made it even funnier to us, is because it was so completely fake and dumb. But we were just having a great time with it, and that's really one of the earliest memories I have of doing this type of thing. And so I think over the years I've come a long way from doing that, and I've definitely gotten better and improved. Just all the skills that kind of go into doing this type of thing, anything from the recording of it, the editing, etc., etc. I've just really developed it over time as primarily a hobby. Most recently, it was reflected in the channel Jordan Anderson Movie Reviews, which is mostly what it says, mostly movie reviews and short videos about movies. So that channel is also still up, and I've decided to keep it up just because most of the videos on there I'm not like really embarrassed of or anything like that, unlike those really older ones that I may be a little bit more. But that channel is also still up, so if you want to take a look at that, just kind of get you more familiar with me and content that I've put out in the past, definitely feel free to do so. So, leading up to why I'm doing a podcast now as opposed to continuing straightforward with YouTube, it's for a couple of reasons. I just think that I like more long-form conversation when it comes to the world of movies, and I listen to a lot of podcasts myself. Whether it's like driving to work or even at work or working out or, there's a lot of different places that people listen to these things. And so I listen to a lot of them, and I really feel engaged and interested in a lot of the ones I listen to. And I thought, hey, rather than having to always squeeze in the time of trying to figure out when I can record a video and do all the color correcting for it and the editing and, if there's sound or all these other different things that I have to put into it, I just thought podcasting would honestly be an easier alternative and, just really something that I could grow and sink my teeth into. And I think it'll just be... I'm hoping that it'll become more of a thing over time, so we'll see. But yeah, that's kind of what led me to where I'm at right now, and so I guess, as they say, that's that. Now, now let's actually get into the movie itself that I want to talk about for this very first episode. And that is going to be the classic Lost in Translation. It stars Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson, which, interesting tidbit about the movie before I kind of dive into all the different thoughts and feelings that I have on it, is I had no idea that Scarlett Johansson was 17 at the time of filming the movie. And the only reason I feel the need to mention that is because Bill Murray and her clearly have an age difference, but I don't know. I mean, I never would have guessed in a million years that she was that young when doing the movie. I think she must just be one of those people that matured quicker than other people do. Not just physically, of course, but also mentally. I mean, just the way that she carries herself in the movie does not strike me as somebody that was 17. I mean, I remember being 17 years old, and I can assure you I was definitely not that put together or all that serious about a lot of different things. So it's, just kind of an interesting fact to think about. And hang on here, I'm going to take a quick sip of what I took a quick sip of. I guess I'll leave that up to you to guess. I'm not going to disclose that. So thinking about Lost in Translation, there's a lot of different things that come to mind for this movie. First, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm going to say that probably a lot on this podcast, but if you have not seen Lost in Translation, it is definitely one that I highly recommend and encourage you to go out and watch. It is a very unique movie for a lot of different reasons, but I'm going to start off the top by just talking about Bill Murray's performance, and I'll keep going. So Bill Murray, I mean, the guy is a comedy legend, or just a legend in general. He's done both comedic films and dramatic films as well, but obviously comedy is, I think, where he's most primarily known as. And his performance in this movie is so controlled. It's so very controlled and measured, and it has all those Bill Murray-isms that you still know and love too, which I think is the perfect balance for the performance in the movie. His performance in the movie strikes a good balance with that, but then also I think his character, it's very suited for his character, which in the movie he is portraying a famous actor, not someone so unlike himself. Though it's never really clear in the movie if he is an actor that's known primarily for comedy, as Bill Murray is, or if it's just, an actor that does a lot of different things. We kind of get the sense in the movie that it may be a bit of both. But Bill Murray is just absolutely fantastic in the movie, and I mean, I of course do love a lot of his comedy movies, but Lost in Translation, I think, may be my favorite Bill Murray performance. Simply just because of all the dramatic elements that he brings to it, the honesty that he brings to it, and the authenticity too, because it really just feels like all the scenes he's in, he's just there. He's just existing very naturally in the scenes. Like, none of it really feels 100% like a movie, and all the dialogue feels so natural too that you can hardly even believe that there's a script half the time. Because it really just seems like you're just watching a moment in time with these two people, Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson, that are coming together in a place that's foreign to both of them, Tokyo, Japan. So Bill Murray's fantastic. I can keep singing his praises, but I want to keep going. But another interesting thing about this movie to me is what it says when it comes to the feelings of loneliness and longing. And that's something I think I gravitated to very early on when I first saw this movie and in subsequent viewings, is just thinking about those feelings, because I feel like they're very relatable, for one. Feeling of loneliness, especially when you're in a crowded place, I think that's one of the interesting things to think about. I'm sure we've all traveled to different cities, or maybe even outside of the country, and to a place where people don't speak the same language. That's something I can definitely relate to, because I have a fiance that is living in Brazil, and I've been there twice now. and most people there don't really speak a word of English, and so it is easy to feel like an outsider and do feel a bit cut off from what you're familiar with, and not really sure how best to communicate it when you're just surrounded by people that likely may not understand what you're saying. So it's interesting how the movie captures that very specific type of loneliness, because as we all know, loneliness takes many shapes and forms. But in this particular case, I think it captures very well the feeling of loneliness even when you are surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of people around you. Loneliness does not have to just mean that you want to be around people all the time. You can just feel lonely on the inside without people having to be much of an effect on it. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but anyway. And then I also think the movie really captures the feeling of longing, and that's an interesting feeling for me, because like a lot of feelings I may talk about in this podcast when I'm relating them to movies, it's a relatable one. Feeling that you want something more, but you're not quite sure how to articulate it, and let alone if you could, you're not really sure if other people would, quite frankly, understand what you're trying to say. And I think that is conveyed very, very well in Lost in Translation. And you could say for that one, it's less is more, because there's really not. I'm not going to say there's not a ton of dialogue in the movie, but the movie is, I think, less about the dialogue per se as it is to the overall atmosphere that the story has as a whole, the world that it has set up. I definitely think it's much more of an atmospheric movie and evokes strong feelings without having to necessarily overly rely on words to convey those feelings. And in that regard, I think the movie is absolutely a brilliant one. Though I should say with that, it's not really going to be for everybody, because some people will probably see this movie as being very slow or dull, or they're not really sure what the narrative is for it, like what the overall structure is, because again, I think I mentioned it once before, the movie feels more so like a slice in time, or a snapshot of a specific moment in time and space. It's very much a real and authentic feeling movie, because I think a lot of it, if I'm not mistaken, was shot on location in Tokyo, and there's real people that live there. I don't think everybody was just purely an extra hired for the film. I think they really just did a sort of a guerrilla style method of filming for it, which just continues to add to that high level of authenticity that's in the movie, which is great. Excuse me. So the atmosphere is very, very, very important for the movie, and it's also very contagious. And I say that because I feel like when I first saw Lost in Translation, I did initially think, this movie's a little slow, but I'm appreciating something here, but I couldn't quite articulate what it was. And then, years later and after repeat viewings, it's just one of those movies that grew on me, and in large part due to the atmosphere and the contagious nature of it, at least to me. And this is where it's going to get very, very specific to myself, and how certain movies, ones like this especially, can have an effect on me. I know when I'm watching movies, especially rewatching movies, that the mood that they put me in is something that I have a sense of awareness of. And some of the times, that's why I like to go back and rewatch certain movies, is because of the place it can put me in. And it's not to say that, I want to watch Lost in Translation because I want to feel really lonely and feeling a sense of deep longing for something and depressed. I don't want to do that. But sometimes there's a comfort in seeing a movie that so captures such relatable feelings and emotions, and especially just really deep-seated ones in humans. And so I've gone back time and time again to Lost in Translation if I'm just kind of feeling a little down or feeling a little out of it, because while the movie does deal with loneliness and longing and several other emotions, there's also a sense of comfort I feel from the movie. I think there's a sense of contentment that eventually gets reached towards the end of it, and I don't know. There's something really, something very. I'm not sure what the right word for it would be. Like zen-like would be a bit too much, but there's something there in this movie for how it can make you feel and bring you some comfort if you are having difficult feelings with loneliness and having a longing for something. I definitely think there's something there for this movie that may help people on that. Another interesting thing in this movie, too, is what it has to say about states of life that you can be in. In the case of the characters in this movie, each of them seems to have reached a place where they're not moving. They kind of feel like there's nowhere to go for them, which both of them in the movie are in Tokyo for reasons that they're not really wanting to be there. I believe Bill Murray's character, Bob Harris, he's there because he's having to shoot a commercial for a whiskey company. And then he eventually, I think, does a talk show there. He's like the Johnny Carson of Japan. That's how I remember that. But he's not really wanting to be there. And of course, he's completely out of his element. He doesn't speak a word of Japanese, etc. And then Scarlett Johansson's character, Charlotte, she is there because she's with her husband that is a photographer for a band, and she's just kind of there because she didn't really have anything else going on because she's a fresh college graduate, doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life, so she's like, oh, why not? I'll spend some time in Tokyo with my newlywed husband, why not? But each of them feels stuck, and it's clear because they have, again, this feeling of longing. They have this feeling of, not having their lives be where they want to be. And it's really hard to articulate stuff like that. And so each of them feels, at least I think, they feel like they're stuck and they feel like they can't really go anywhere with their lives at that present moment, which is just really interesting. And another interesting thing about the movie is just, again, how honest it is. I don't mean like just authentic with the world around it, but how honest the characters are and how well they're written. They do feel like very real people in their actions and what they do. And I think this movie's also very smart about avoiding cliches that would happen in a movie like this. Like thankfully it's not a movie where Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson, they meet and, they're like, oh, you're charming, I'm charming, we're going to get together and we're going to fall in love and all that. It's not like that at all, which is really refreshing. And it feels more real because I don't think sometimes movies like that, the movies that do those types of tropes, I mean, they're fun, they might be entertaining, but they're not the most authentic when it comes to real life. So Lost in Translation exceeds at that immensely. This might be one of my more favorite elements of the movie is the underlying themes and universal, is it message? The universal need for connection is really felt entirely throughout the movie. And I just mean with people, with having genuine, deep connections with people. It's something that I think everybody deep down really craves on one form or another, and it's really hard to find people that you can share those types of feelings with. And interestingly enough, in this movie, it's in a totally not romantic sense, which I find, again, just very refreshing between a man and a woman, let alone an older man with a younger woman. But the relationship that they form in the movie is so sweet, and it's so honest and sincere, and it's coming from a good place that it's just, I'm repeating myself here, but I got to. It's very refreshing. It's really, really refreshing to see characters not jumping all over each other, after like 10 minutes from knowing each other. It's just people that they're both lonely, they're both lost, and they're trying to just get through and figure things out, and they happen to bump into each other and spark a connection and form a relationship that's just a great bond that they share throughout the entire movie, and then they leave it that way too, which makes it all the more all the more like sad, I guess, at the end of it, because when the movie ends, you're just like, you almost don't want to see him go back home to America and her to leave as well. It's that's what I got to say about that. But it's really, really interesting. And again, that need for connection is just such a universal feeling, and one that I think so many people can relate to. Is that we all just want to connect, and we all want to find that someone special that we can connect with, even if it is for like a day, a week, a second in time. It doesn't really matter. We just want to connect, and the movie so beautifully illustrates that. And another great thing I like about this movie is how it takes its time with its scenes. I think that's very important for a movie like this, is that you don't want to have there be too many cuts. You want things to feel natural. You want to feel authentic. So you got to let things breathe, and you need to let scenes play out just very naturally. And so by there being less edits, being more long, drawn out takes, it's deliberate for the pacing, but it also helps to give that movie a more authentic feel to it. And it's just very, very excellent to behold. And I think another thing I could say about this movie too is its contemplative, not midlife crisis nature, but reflective nature that is apparent throughout the movie. Because I feel like each of the characters, I mentioned their loneliness, longing, all these different feelings, kind of how they're stuck at that current time in their life, but you can feel that each of them is reflecting on it in very different ways. So for Bob Harris, Bill Murray, his character seems to, I would say his is a bit more in a potential midlife crisis. I think at one point they actually joke about it, and she's like, "Oh, you haven't bought a Porsche yet?" And he makes some casual glib remark, like blowing that off, like, "Oh no, I'm thinking about doing it at some point soon." But his character seems to be having some type of a midlife crisis, but I think his is just a feeling of, I'm not really sure what to do with that. Like, I think he might be aware of it, but I don't know if he knows what to do with it. Like, he doesn't really go out and do anything super impulsive. He just sort of lays around. He can't hardly sleep. He goes to the nighttime is it the lounge? There's a hotel bar there, a lounge. I'm not really sure what you call it, but he goes there and frequents that space a lot at night while he's there, and just slowly sips whiskey and just thinks a lot. And so I think that's interesting. But then Charlotte Johansson's character, hers is also interesting as well, because she's doing it but in a different way. I know early on in the movie she's listening to like some self-help audio of people trying to tell her how to find her inner peace, and I think she kind of finds it humorous but also sad that she's listening to that type of thing. And so I think she's seeking an answer, maybe not vocally, but she's doing it certainly in her actions by doing that, or going to this garden at one point in the movie, and going to a temple and trying to listen to monks. So she's clearly searching for something to understand why she's feeling the way she's feeling, and in that I think she's very reflective, which that's something I think I just value in people that tend to have a self-awareness or can take the time to reflect about things. And that's something else too, is this movie, I think it also shows you the value of travel. There may be loneliness that comes with it, or isolation, or cultural barriers or differences, but you do get some time to think. And I think that's really very valuable in this day and age. In this day and age, especially when there's so much social media and distractions at work that pull you in a million different directions, and you have family and friends and just all kinds of different things going around that, like, it's like you just have to think, like, where do you even get the time to just stop and think, let alone for 10-15 minutes. I mean, could you really like stop and take like a whole day to think about something, a week? I don't know. I mean, I guess that's why jobs have paid time off, but it doesn't make it easier to get to that place, I guess. And so one of the benefits, I think, from traveling that's apparent in this movie is having that time to be away from what you know, be out of your shell, be away from your routine. And by being away from that, you're allowed to realize things about yourself and listen to that voice inside your head, I think, a lot better. But again, you have to take the time to actually listen to it. And that's, I can't say if people, if a lot of people do that. I think there's probably more that do it than we would really realize, but I don't know. It's definitely something interesting to think about. And then let me see, what else can I say about this movie? The soundtrack, I should talk about that. Soundtrack for this movie is really, really good. And so part of the music, part of the score for it, which I don't have in front of me. Actually, you know what? I got the Blu-ray with me right now, just as a reference for this. I'm looking. Who did the music for this movie? Let's see. I'm looking. So the original music was by Kevin Shields. I guess look up Kevin Shields, people. Give him a like or give him a listen. We'll see if he's got some other good stuff out there. But looks like he did the music for this, and did a bang up job, because the score and all the subtleties with it, I think, work really well. The music really adds to that feeling of loneliness and longing that the movie's trying to shoot for across. But then it also has a couple really good songs in there. There's some gems in there. I think Lost in Translation was the first movie where I think I ever heard a song by Phoenix. I think that's the band. I think they have 2 or 3 songs in this movie, but the music is definitely good. And hang on. Pop-ups. You have to disable the pop-ups when you're recording, otherwise they're going to distract you and you end up talking about them on your podcast. So yeah, the soundtrack, really, really very good. I guess if I'm talking more about the technical sides of the film, I would talk about how well shot it is, which I do think it is exceptionally shot, and it's just very good. Oh, and you know what? I think the last thing I'm going to say about this movie is, aside, if I haven't already said this once, aside from all the atmospheric qualities of, the loneliness, depression, whatever you want to call it, aside from the atmosphere of the movie is really quite charming too, which I think that's what makes it certainly more watchable for some people, rather than just being a depressive bummer of a movie to get through. Because there's some good lighthearted humor that's sprinkled throughout the movie. I think one of the earliest ones I remember is the part where I think it's Bill Murray's first night, or his first morning in the hotel, and he wakes up and goes to take a shower, and he can barely get the shower past, I think, his chest line, because he's a pretty tall guy, and most people in that part of the world are not tall. So I definitely think there's just little subtle humor like that that's also probably relatable, because when you go to a place that's very different from what you know, there's likely going to be a lot of things like that you didn't expect before you came. And I'm thinking of another one right now. Let's see. Just like when they go out in the movie, there's a couple of times where they just go out and kind of have a night in the town, and that feels very funny, very light, very nice. I know I can't help but smile like a goon when I see the scene where they're doing karaoke, and I think Scarlett Johansson sings "Brass in the Pocket" by the Pretenders, which the Pretenders, they're really, I don't know if they're an underrated band, but I feel like to someone that's my age, to a 30-year-old, most people probably don't really talk about the Pretenders, but they're very good. Definitely give them a listen. But that scene where she's doing karaoke and he's there with her friends, and it's probably like 3 a.m. or something like that. I mean, it just looks like the kind of night that almost anybody would want to have at one point or another. I mean, you're just with good people, you're having a good time, there's no problems, and you're just singing some good songs and having fun. And the way that they're looking at each other and they're smiling, you can just tell that in that very moment they feel connected and they feel happy. And I don't know, that scene was one of my favorites in the movie. But then shortly after that, I think like they kind of realized like, this is a nice distraction, but we still feel some of those feelings that we came into this experience with, which is that's an interesting one for sure. But let's see, what else could I talk about for this movie? Well, Sofia Coppola directed it, so I guess, sure, I'll talk about that. I believe that she is Francis Ford Coppola's daughter. I want to say so, because her name, I think I first saw her because she starred in Godfather 3, I think, and she was pretty universally panned for it, if I remember right. And also Godfather 3 is just not that great. But anyways, I'll stay on point. Lost in Translation, not Godfather 3. Yeah, I just thought of this. If this is going to be the most obscure reference possible for how my brain works, but in Godfather 3, one of the most famous lines in it is, "Just when I'm out, they pull me back in." And I just told myself that as Al Pacino to get me pulled back into focus on Lost in Translation and not on Godfather 3. What the hell does that mean? I don't know. That might just mean I have some type of mental disorder that I need to diagnose. But hey, I'm not going to worry about that right now. This is not the time and place for that. Okay. I want to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap this up by saying one more thing about this kind of movie. So, I think I said, I did say early on that movies like this, I don't really necessarily think are going to be for everybody. There's a lot of different themes and messages going on in a movie like this. But however you want to look at it, it is a slower paced movie. It is not as obvious with its comedy as other just straight romantic comedies are. It's a very, very unique movie, but I think it's accessible and I think it's more approachable than other smaller films of this kind. I think sometimes if you mention movies like this to like the average moviegoer, and by average moviegoer, I just mean somebody that why can't I say primarily? I was saying preliminary, but it's primarily. Someone that primarily watches, like let's say Marvel movies. Not that I'm crapping on them, but, excuse me, someone that watches Marvel movies may not really think that Lost in Translation is going to be their bag, and it very well may not be. But if you are looking for a movie that is very atmospheric, has a lot to say, has a lot beneath the surface, and is going to make you feel something, then I think Lost in Translation is definitely worth a look, and it's definitely worth talking about with your friends after you watch the movie. So, I think that's all that I have to say about this movie, and I think that's all I got for this first episode. So, I'm looking at the clock right now. It's not too bad. At about 38 minutes or so. So, yeah, it's not bad. And you know what? This is a pilot. I'm not going to give myself too much grief for this. We're gonna, I'll keep it going. We'll keep the content rolling, and I will develop my voice and the structure for all this stuff over due time and over many episodes. So, I thank you all for listening. Thank you all for taking the time. I hope you found this. I hope you found this episode enjoyable, and I hope it gave you something to think about, and hopefully makes you want to watch Lost in Translation, because again, it's a pretty damn good movie. So. I'm Jordan Anderson. You've been listening to Screen Speak, and that is it for today's episode. All right, I'll catch you here next time. See ya.